Beyond the Bubble, Free Speech Rights. Take 1, 2, 3, 4.
Kia ora, nau mai anō ki tēnei wāhanga. Welcome back to our second part of this discussion on the right to free speech. Kia ora no tātou. Paul, I just want to come back to you because before our break you mentioned risk, that there has to be a way of us living together in society in a contextualised way that doesn't just treat the right to free speech as something that floats off in the ether, but is actually part of how we live in society. And you talked about the management of risk, and presumably that's referring to the risk of causing harm to others. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about how you would do that? How can we achieve that?
Well, I'm not sure that I've got this all worked out in exactly that way. It may be about quantifying it, maybe just articulating it. When you have, as happened in Paris in 2011, if you have 100,000 signatures from French citizens saying they are appalled, they are harmed, they are hurt, and then a judge at the Court of the highest civil court saying they shouldn't be, they don't understand, then we have a problem. And it's that beginning to say, well, in what way is it offensive? This is much more difficult than I'm suggesting. It's not an easy thing. These are heartfelt issues about identity, about what constitutes in culturally different situations offence, the nature of that offence, the threat, the perception, and the various vulnerabilities. It can't be beyond us to be able to get better at this, but we seem to be doing the opposite.
Thalia, I'm thinking of the way in which you manage various online communities. I think you do an amazingly skillful job of bringing together quite polarised people. Is there something that you can say here about the construction of a community in which difference is tolerated?
In for instance, the Facebook groups that I am an administrator, I advocate for there to be no articulated rules. Because it's my experience that in online spaces, if you articulate rules, it encourages people to give away their personal responsibility to be good humans in that space, and they just wait to be told that they can't do something. And so that's been an experiment that we've just sort of intuitively gone towards, and it has worked very well. I think that we all need to develop a stronger personal ethics of public discourse and how we contribute to it. And not just that we would stop ourselves from being horrible in public spaces, although I wish that people commenting in the Stuff comment section would take that kind of approach. But the rest of us who are not being horrible in public spaces need to take a bit more action to inject the opposite into public discussion. And I don't just mean, well, I don't mean rainbow and unicorn posters. I mean that particularly those of us who have intersecting privileges need to deliberately spend time in public discourse amplifying the voices of other people and supporting them when they are under fire and calling out bigotry when we see it. I think that online spaces in particular would be a lot better if the silent majority were not silent. That the whole point of free speech laws in liberal democracies is so that better ideas bubble up and we have a better society. And I think that we're at real risk at the moment. If you are a disabled or brown person in public spaces in Aotearoa right now, if you are a woman with opinions that you say out loud, you are at risk of having your opinions and yourself attacked disproportionately, much more than white men receive, and that's my observation. And that means that we all lose out. We are all losing those wonderful ideas from all sorts of people. And so I think we all should be more active and proactive ourselves at making public discourse more positive.
Right, so there's a civic responsibility idea there that we should all kind of lay claim to. Peter, what would you...
Yeah, I mean, what bothers me is that in some sense the very idea of liberal democracy is almost impossible to achieve today, because let's face that the traditional democracies, and when we say traditional, they're only 100 years old, they were a fairly closed platform, in fact, whereas you say quite a lot of people were silenced, didn't have a voice anyway, and so the space that was required was not very broad. But in our much more multicultural, multi-generational, multi-abled societies of today, let alone the religious diversity in them, it is so extraordinarily difficult because even very large groups do not share the same space or the same notion of what is appropriate and what's offensive. I mean, I was very conscious in the debate on the actions of my own Vice-Chancellor in silencing the voice of a rather tame ex-leader of the opposition in New Zealand.
That's Don Brash, by the way, just in case we've forgotten.
Yes, well...
he won't take that as a compliment.
No, not at all, no. But I think a factor probably weighing on this decision, though who would know, was in fact the sense of offence to the Māori community. And I think there probably is real and deep hurt within the Māori community today, an enormous sense of the pain and grievance which is at last being voiced. I mean, traditionally, Māori would never have voiced these viewpoints. Now I think the horror and the grievance is coming out and being expressed.
I think that point of view would have been voiced, but just in different social context.
Not published in the Pākehā media.
No, not in the kind of public or civic discourse. But
not in that public space, which is our liberal media. Yeah, precisely. Yes, I mean, it might. Of course, I mean, intriguingly, Māori. There's plenty of disagreement happens in the Māori world. I mean, I'm always struck on the Marae.
All worlds, yeah.
Well, but on the Marae, I mean, extraordinarily diverse voices are heard. But on the other hand, they're balanced in a context where the voices sort of have a chance to speak back. And this is the puzzle for me.
I think that's to do with process, isn't it? There's a particular process that governs that discourse.
So perhaps we need extra process in our sort of society.
Listening to both of you, I mean, I think my view, I thought I was actually rosier than both of you, but I think I'm now bleaker than both of you, in the sense that you were assuming there is a discourse. What we've got, I mean, are ships passing in the night, and your notion of intersectionality is exactly the right one, that we want to say, well, I mean, the feminist issue and the racial issue and the colonial issue are linked, but the people increasingly among some of our students, one student chose to do his research essay on Jordan Peterson this year, which meant I had to read him to mark it. But there is a, I don't know what we want to call it, a counter-intersectionality, which it sees itself as just as rational, just as moral, but is obsessed by political correctness, freedom of speech, another agenda.
Yeah. And equally aggrieved.
And equally aggrieved, exactly. And so it's not that we need to call them out. I mean, that's exactly the polarisation. I mean, there has to be a way of trying to bridge that gap. Otherwise, we're not speaking to our own students, our own fellow citizens, etc., etc.
So personal responsibility does come down, though, doesn't it, to personal responsibility?
Well, personal responsibility means something radically different to the alt-right, where it's based on a particular 19th century version of liberal individualism, and that's not what I mean by personal responsibility. It didn't seem to be what you were saying.
I think it's communal responsibility we're actually talking about, where nobody has the right to speak freely unless, in fact, they own that they're part of this community.
And that speech doesn't, by definition, exclude.
Yes,
which is so often what it's designed to do.
Indeed. But we've all got to learn a lesson in this process, because it's actually going to be challenging for every single one of us.
Yeah. So the personal and the communal and the collective and the societal. No small ask. Kia ora koutou, I think we've come to the end of our time today, so thank you all for your contributions today. Nā reira, ka nui te mihi. Kia ora koutou.
We've only just begun.
Yes, I know.